What will life be like for British children when social media is banned for under 16s in the UK from next spring? We have been speaking to one of the architects of the policy, the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. And here's her take on what they'll all be doing instead. Education Secretary, hello.
Hello.
And thanks for coming in as well, rather than doing it from your laptop in your office.
Much better.
Have you got your red box with you? Does it travel with you everywhere?
I've got my red folder with me, so I've got in there what I'm doing today and various documents for various meetings.
Good.
And my lines to take for.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Do you want to? I don't see it to hand, though, so you're just going to have to rely on your wits. So first of all, social media. Let's just sort of do the science bit first. So the ban on under 16-year-olds, we think that will be in place next spring.
That's the intention. We would need to bring forward regulation and that would have to pass through Parliament. But yes, it's our intention that it would take effect then.
And will there be a vote for MPs? Because I know it's not legislation, so it's not like a new bill, but will MPs get a vote on it?
My understanding is yes, because it would be a secondary legislation form of regulations and therefore there would be a chance for people to have their say, although I think it's fair to say that there is widespread support across Parliament for tougher action in this area. We obviously legislated through the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill to allow us to take on these powers to bring forward further regulation in this area.
And it will be a list of 10 apps initially that the ban will apply to.
So it'll be those where you've got both the content and the algorithm and the ability to engage in that way, which is why it's important how we define social media. That will obviously require careful kind of consideration over time as different technologies develop. I do think this is the right thing to do because, you know, we've seen more and more young people just drawn into spending almost endless amounts of time on social media. And I do worry about just the impact of spending so much time on screens and devices. Social media is an important element of this, but it's not the only element. And I think particularly with our youngest children, it's not actually about social media. It's just about the length of time that children are spending looking at screens, often from a very young age, and all of the potential downsides. So this is one element, and a very important element of how we give children their childhood back. But this runs hand in hand with a much bigger piece of work across government that I'm leading around childhood, around young people feeling happy about experience in school, a sense of belonging, feeling that actually you have other things to do other than just doom scrolling.
Yeah, and we'll come on to that in a second, but just in terms of what's actually going to be implemented. And then the second set of things is related to things like doom scrolling. There will be a sort of a list of, I don't know what you call them, actions, tools, features of apps that will be limited for people between the ages of 16 and 17. That's the sort of the second part of this.
So there'll be a further update to all of this in July later on this year, where we'll look at further measures. We've set out the first steps that we intend to take. But there are questions as well, and we are taking action on AI chatbots where they can drive young people to highly inappropriate material.
Basically the romance chatbots.
Yeah. And where we've seen some awful incidents involving young people who might be feeling, seriously mentally unwell, and that can lead to some devastating outcomes. I think it's important, however, to draw a distinction between the harms that can come from that kind of technology and actually the real benefits that can come of technology when used well. And there are enormous opportunities to be explored around the use of technology to help children's learning. And that's why as we take action in some areas, we also have to guard against unintended consequences where technology used well can be transformative. But in the right hands, with the right tools, with the right supervision and oversight, AI is going to change a lot of things in education, some of it actually really positively.
Well, we saw that in some of the reactions yesterday to the announcement about the ban. And one of the examples was, okay, say you've got a 13-year-old child who's obsessed with physics. Right now, they can go on YouTube, for example, and watch endless lectures by the world's best physicists, which they will get a lot out of. When this ban is in place, because YouTube's covered by it, that 13-year-old physics fan is not going to get that content.
So I think there are also questions for the platforms in some of this. So we've got, for example, YouTube Kids that's targeted at younger children where that wouldn't be within the scope of what we're talking about. It's a different kind of platform. I mean, if YouTube want to come up with something that's an intermediate option that allows that young person who wants to watch history documentaries to continue to watch them, but isn't then getting all of these short reels, that's a different proposition. And also, I think it's also true around young children and screens. So we've set out screen time guidance for the under 5s. So helpful advice to parents about what a good use of screens would look like. So basically with under 2s, don't. Above the age of 2, an hour a day, and try and do it in a way that is interactive with your child, not just giving a child a device and saying, get on with it. If a parent wants to sit and watch content with a 13-year-old on the Second World War or whatever, physics documentary, that's a very different kind of proposition to children being allowed unfettered access to strangers, to harmful material, being able to be contacted by people they've never met. We've allowed children to be exposed to things inside the home that we just wouldn't allow outside of the home.
Oh, so basically you would be okay with a mum or a dad or a carer saying, "Oh, right, I'll watch that physics video with you on my YouTube account that I've logged into with my age verification as an over 16-year-old."
I think
That's fine.
parents have to make choices about what is also appropriate for their children. I think it's right that government regulates to make sure that as far as possible children have happy, healthy childhoods without harm. But there is always a role for parental responsibility in this. It's not to blame parents. It's just to say, look, sometimes parents will be a good judge of what is appropriate for their child at a different point. I think government has a role to play in setting out those parameters, as we have done with the screen time guidance we've issued for the under fives. But then if a parent wants to sit and watch, CBeebies with their child for an hour on an evening, who am I to stop them doing that?
Yeah, because I was going to say you must feel a little bit of trepidation that you're going to be accused of being the nanny state and kind of going into people's living rooms and telling them how to behave.
Look, I think there is real support amongst parents for the action that we're taking around social media and the under 16s. This can drift into tricky territory if you're not careful, but I think it's reasonable that government sets out that bigger framework. But alongside that, gives parents the practical, helpful advice that they need about how to manage in a world where technology is transforming everything about the world of work, education, a whole range of different things. And adults are no different to children in sometimes, being the worst offenders, actually, where it comes to the use of technology. For example,
What are you getting at?
we're all guilty of it. I mean, I don't pretend that I'm a saint, but there is an opportunity cost. So if as a parent, you're spending a lot of time looking at a screen, not with your child, it's not just the child's exposure to screens, it's also your responsibilities as a parent. And I don't say that in a way to be judgmental, because I know lots of parents have it really hard. Like, I know it can be really tough being a parent, especially for the first time. And that's why government stepping in where government only can, with providing massive investment and resources into Best Start family hubs, so that there are more free and cheap activities for children and families, more early advice around things like health visitor support. If children are having difficulties around speech and language, being able to access that far more quickly, free rhyme time, stay and play. That's where government needs to step in, because alongside this big explosion in technology we've seen over the last decade or so, we've also seen a massive contraction in resources and support available to parents, and that's what we're trying to turn around.
I'm intrigued though that you're hoping, or you're saying that one of the spin-off benefits of the ban on social media, so the sort of headline thing, is that everyone of every age who's got caring responsibilities looks at their own behaviour. You're trying to create a new world here with our relationship with screens.
We do need to look at our own behaviour, and if you look at reading, for example, so we'd seen a big drop off in recent years in the number of children reading for pleasure. Actually, for the first time in 5 years, that started to increase, which is fantastic, because we're in the middle of the National Year of Reading, where we're trying to really change people's experiences. But look, adults spend a lot of time scrolling in the way that in the past they might have been reading or doing other things. So I do think we have to consider how we behave, all of us, and I don't exclude myself from that, as we think about what we want for our children. But of course, there are differences with children, because for lots of reasons, we put in place various age limits on certain things because we think they're harmful or not good for children, or that they shouldn't be exposed to certain things when they're too young to understand the full context. And that's why it's right that in parallel, we also put in place tougher regulation around things like social media.
Have you discussed this with your own children yet? Because I can't remember exactly what age they are, but I feel they're in scope for this.
I have, and my kids follow the news quite closely, and they like to read what's going on, newspapers and so forth. We have discussed it. You'll appreciate that it's also important that my children,
they have privacy,
have their own privacy, and they don't choose what I do.
Let's put it another way. Having had the conversations with your own children, what advice or learnings have you got from how to broach the fact that some of their favourite apps like Snapchat are not going to be available to them next year?
Look, I think it is the right thing to do, and it won't be universally popular amongst young people. I think that's safe to say, particularly those who have already got access to certain platforms. But I think what lots of parents are really pleased about is that it will stop other young people getting caught up in that, because younger children who aren't already on those platforms, don't already have smartphones. It starts to close that down before they reach that point of it becoming a peer pressure thing. We know that lots of parents will say that they don't want their only child, they don't want their child to be the only one in a class that doesn't
Yes.
have this. And, lots of schools have taken action on this. We've supported them. Phones have got no place in school. But there are also considerations that parents will have about, they might want their child to have a smartphone so they can keep in touch at the end of the school day, but they might not at the same time want them to be going on social media at too young an age. So that's why the changes we're bringing will strike that right balance. But at the same time, children have drifted into a world where they can see an awful lot online that we wouldn't regard as good for them. In fact, a lot of what they might see, we wouldn't regard as being good or healthy or safe for adults to really be consuming. At the same time, when their worlds have often become smaller in terms of their face-to-face or real-world interactions. Now, some of that is because there are fewer opportunities, and it's my job, and I'm seeking to massively expand activities like music and sport and art and drama, both in school and around school. But I think also the nature of childhood has changed quite a lot. And in the past, where it was far more usual for children to walk to school by themselves, cycle around on a bike by themselves, go up and visit friends,
Go out all day,
just be out.
come back at tea time.
Exactly. And there was no means of keeping in touch. Phones were not a thing when I was a child. You just had to set a time when you came back, and you had certain parameters around that. I think this will allow young people to experience what is important as you grow up, which is understanding boundaries, becoming yourself as an individual, parents having to have a degree of trust about what works, and a level of independence, of course, understanding and managing that risk.
Yeah.
But I think we've ended up in this odd paradox of more exposure at home in the child's bedroom to quite harmful things, and a reduction in the ability for children to take safe risks as they grow up in their local community.
But
And there's good. I understand why sometimes parents will be nervous, but I think we've got to allow children to be children, and that doesn't just mean taking things away. And we do need to act, but it means opening up other possibilities.
Well, yeah, for example, you can't say go out and play now that you've got loads of time saved from looking at Instagram when you still also have knife crime. So yeah, I get that point. What I can't stop thinking about is, are we going to have this generation, and I can't quite work out what ages they are, but a generation of people who are sort of entering their teens now, who've been exposed to a lot of social media, a lot of bad stuff. And well, they always will have been. That generation will now just get older and older and older. And so the generation before them didn't have it. The generation below, younger than them, won't have it as a result of this. And then you have this sort of like cursed generation who've had to put up with all of this stuff.
I hope not.
My words, not yours.
Yeah, I hope not. And I think it is sometimes hard to understand the impact and the evidence in isolation. So I think the emerging evidence is clear about the impact of long-term, extensive exposure of young children to screens. It is becoming increasingly clear that there are downsides to that have, whether it's speech and language development, children's ability to regulate, much more besides. But that's emerging, and it's not a totally clear picture. However, if we waited until that point, it could well be too late. That's part of the challenge. I think it's also important.
Oh, so you acknowledge that the evidence isn't a slam dunk yet. You're kind of doing this as a precautionary thing.
I think, yes, the evidence. I think the evidence may only become slam dunk at the point at which we've gone past a point that we've gone past the point of no return, and that's part of the trouble. Certainly, the approach we took around the advice to parents on screen time and the under fives was very much on the basis of the precautionary approach and the precautionary principle, which I think is right, given that we're talking about our youngest children, and there is no harm that comes of being allowed to have less time on a screen when you're very young. I don't see the harm that comes of that, but we know there could be potential long-term consequences of being allowed to have too much time on devices. So the evidence isn't absolutely slam dunk, and we can't separate this out from, I think, some of the wider experiences the children have had in recent years and some of the other areas of concern that I have about how we've moved as a society. The big expansion, the huge kind of growth of child poverty, the numbers that we see, that has a big and devastating impact on children's life chances. And if you live in a community where there isn't very much in terms of wider opportunity, or where you don't feel that you belong, you don't feel that you're going to achieve very much and you don't feel that there are good opportunities around work and where you move beyond school, then of course you feel hopeless. And then that online world can kind of step in and actually make things worse. But it's not the only factor. So alongside the action we're taking on social media, that has to be coupled with more opportunities for young people, which we are delivering, alongside tackling child poverty, where we've got the most ambitious agenda of any government, even more ambitious than the last Labour government, in bringing down those numbers, and a much bigger focus on family support, on making sure that parents, when their children are young, feel well supported and that their children are able to thrive. So it has to be all of that together. It's a social media ban alone is not going to fix every problem that every young person in this country is experiencing at the moment.
Well, I'm just thinking, you must have seen the clip that went viral yesterday of the girl in Lancashire going, "Oh, I did 9 hours of screen time at the weekend," and my colleague says, "And what will you do with the 9 hours you just got?" And she goes, "Stare at a wall." I mean, she's obviously that's a joke, but you realize that's then a lot of extra hours to fill. And some of the stuff that you're talking about there, music lessons or access to culture, that's a few hours, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's now going to be like the big job of filling those kids' time.
I thought she was brilliant. I thought she was really, really deadpan, and
Comedy career beckons.
Yeah, I thought she was. I thought it was both insightful, but also the delivery. She's got a great career ahead of her, I'm sure. There is that, and I don't think government shouldn't seek to fill every hour of a young person's life with activities. I mean, there is obviously a dimension here where if you're from a less well-off background, you're less likely to have those opportunities. And that's why I think it is important that whoever you are and wherever you live, you have access to music, to sport, to cultural activities. And also that you've got parents who've got enough money to do some of that with you, a trip to the beach, an ice cream in the park, all of the things that make family life in childhood such a joyful experience, or at least should be a joyful experience. Equally, there is nothing wrong with kids being bored. That is also an important part of growing up. If you're bored, go and find something to do. And I don't say that dismissively for young people where that is more limited, but actually, go and find something to do. Be a little bit bored.
You know, as a mum, and I know as an uncle, although my niece and nephew are now too old for this, but that dealing with a bored child and finding something for them to do can be quite taxing.
It can be, but it does them no harm to be told. Go and find something to do.
What would you do when you were bored? I bet you read about. I bet you were never bored because you probably always had a book to read.
I mean, I did read, but actually, much of my childhood, or particularly my teenage years, we used to just wander around the town. You know, we sometimes will see young people where they're hanging around, and sometimes that can be intimidating, or it can be not with good intention. If we see a group of young people, we think, "What are they up to?" And I appreciate for older residents, it can be intimidating. Equally, we used to leave the house. I'd go meet my friends. We'd wander around for hours. We'd hang around the park. We'd go and buy some chips. We'd go to the shopping centre. We'd go to one of my friend's house. I'd get on my bike. I'd cycle up to my grandparents. I'd be out all day. No mobile phone.
Yeah.
I knew when I had to be back by, and I knew where to go if there were problems. And that was done in a way where it was understood what was within in a way that was age appropriate.
Yes.
And you also have to take a judgment as a parent as to the level of maturity of your child. Also, how if you would need to feel confident that they could respond if something went wrong. So where would they go for help if they ran into trouble? And that's important too. But these are quite important rites of passage. Actually growing in independence.
And learning to be bored. Yeah, I mean, maybe some journalists could do with that.
And I think understanding who you are as a person and learning how to kind of deal with a world that can be quite frightening for young people, but that with the right boundaries and right support around you from your parents, you can start to learn to navigate that world. And I think for young people, and this was the point earlier about their experiences, and they're a generation that have grown up with social media. That's true, but they're also a generation that came of age during the pandemic, when lots of the experiences that were normal for children, meeting up with friends, you know, going to a cafe, whatever it might be, meeting up in the town centre, that wasn't allowed. You couldn't do that. And schools were closed for extended periods to many children. So it has been quite a fraught time for lots of young people. I do think we need to recognise the impact that has had and actually continues to have for children and for families.
I'm thinking back to the pandemic, and do you remember when you were in opposition, and do you remember Boris Johnson had commissioned that piece of work about catching up? And what was the guy's name again?
Kevin Collins.
Kevin Collins, yes. And he resigned because the government wasn't willing to stump up the billions that he thought were necessary to get that generation back on track. Looking back, do you think actually the response to picking those children up and helping them recover from the pandemic was to use a Scottish word, peely-wally, not effective enough?
It wasn't good enough, although I'm delighted.
And you're also part of the response as well, because it's overlapped.
Yeah, and Kevin Collins now works with me in the Department for Education, so he's working.
Hence why
he's
you can
working
remember his
with
name
me.
and I can't. Yeah,
he's working with me every day. So I think there are two things. The response wasn't good enough, but it actually wasn't just the response in terms of educational recovery. I think if ever we end up in a situation like that again, why is it took so long to open playgrounds? Why did we not prioritise children's well-being and children's life chances in the way that we should have done? And there is emerging evidence through the inquiry as to how we failed to take children's needs seriously at that time. Why did women have to, give birth alone and all of that? It was a really tough time for lots of people. But I think on the kind of wider catch-up side, one of the key areas that Kevin Collins identified was the length of the school day as being a barrier to some of that. And whilst what I'm about to say is not quite the same thing, we are rolling out free breakfast clubs across the country. That means when we get to the end of the Parliament and every single primary school in our country has a breakfast club, that's an extra 30 minutes of childcare for parents. It's another 30 minutes where children can be with their friends, have a breakfast, have that soft start to the day. It's not mandatory, of course it isn't, but it is in effect an extension of the school day, which was something that Kevin argued for at the time. And if money were no object and if I had a magic wand, then I think there is this question about what we try to cram into quite a constrained period of time.
Yeah, because what I was getting at was you've now had 2 years, and I'm just wondering, that means you've got a record to reflect on. And I'm just wondering if you look back and think, oh, we should have done more sooner. And okay, people might love breakfast clubs, and they're not for free, so there's money being spent on them. But actually, should you have done more because it was such a crisis for that group of children?
I mean, we have done a huge amount, both in terms of investment in school and around school. Lisa and Andy's been doing brilliant work around the National Youth Strategy, around expanding opportunities for young people. So we've got a strong record on that. But of course, by 2024, the pandemic had, things had moved on and decisions that could have been taken weren't taken. Now, I don't say that just to make a partisan point. I think the last government could have done more to invest in education at that stage. But I think there is also just a bigger question for all of us as a country where if in future we end up in this kind of situation, how do we really make sure we think seriously about the impact on children? And we didn't. And that's not just about one political party. It's about our approach as a whole society in recognising the impact that can be had when children don't have what they need when they're younger. And that's not just about school. It's also, we reopen pubs before we reopen playgrounds. Yeah. I mean, I'm all for supporting the hospitality industry, but I also think kids should be able to go to a playground, especially if they don't have a garden at home.
Yeah. Just going back to what you said about breakfast clubs and lengthening the school day, and do we cram too much into quite a short period of time? Is there an argument for an even longer school day?
I mean, there is, but it also costs an awful lot of money.
What side of the argument are you on?
Well, if money were no object, I know what I would do, but that's not the world in which we live.
Oh, in an ideal world, when would school finish then? 6:30?
I think that's a bit much, but you would certainly, I think, you wouldn't necessarily just use that time for the kind of the traditional academic side of things. You would also make sure that you're able to allow, for wider opportunities for young people as a part of that. This is a distant dream because the costs are phenomenal. And we face big challenges at the moment around making sure that we invest more in our schools, and we are, and there is more to do. But, Kevin Collins, who's a brilliant, who's brilliant and has looked at all of the evidence, there is a very strong case for it. Of course there is. But that's not something sadly I can fund at the moment.
Right, a few other things. Just before you came into the studio, John Healey was doing his resignation statement in the House of Commons, so that traditional thing that people can choose to do after they've resigned from the cabinet. He said the government should be aiming to spend 3% of GDP, so the whole economy, on defence by 2030. Is he right? Because that is more ambitious than the government's current target.
So as you say, I haven't seen it because I was coming here when John was making that speech. I think we all recognise that there is a need to spend more on defence above and beyond what we've already committed to. So we're already committed to the kind of biggest levels of defence spending since the Cold War.
Yeah, that's the bit that's already been done.
That's already been done.
What about 3% in 2030?
And there's more to come. I mean, those discussions are underway as to both the extent of the funding and the timescales around that. That's not something I'm closely involved in. That's not my role. But yes, we do need to spend more, but I will leave it to others to consider those questions around level and pace.
You wouldn't say 3% by 2030, though.
Look, this is for other colleagues across government to resolve, and we are intent on bringing forward the Defence Investment Plan and setting out the further investment that will come. But I do think it is important to recognise, and I'm sure that John himself obviously recognises, because he delivered this and did a brilliant job as Defence Secretary in getting defence spending up to levels that we haven't seen since the Cold War.
And in your department, have you had to cut or trim your capital budget so that that money can be reallocated to defence in future?
Yes, I've made sure that my department makes our contribution to this. I believe that it is the right thing to do to make sure that we're spending more on defence, alongside the big capital programme that we have to rebuild schools across our country. And I believe we can do both of those things.
What have you had to give up?
That will be published in the fullness of time, but I'm confident in what we have agreed to. It is the right thing to do for the country, but alongside that, it will still allow us to deliver a really ambitious programme of renewal of our schools and colleges.
Although it was interesting over the weekend, Lisa Nandy, when she was chatting to Laura on Sunday morning, said, she suggested that maybe there was going to be another go at funding this defence investment plan, and maybe there'd be another round of, can we find even more money for this? But it sounds like that's not what's happening. It sounds like the settlement was done a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, and it's closed now.
I'm not closely involved in these discussions, but what I would
They've not asked you to find more money.
What I would imagine is happening is that Dan Jarvis, as the new Defence Secretary, will want to take a careful look at all of this, which is, if I were in his position, that's exactly what I want to do. Okay.
Keir Starmer, your boss, is at the G7 summit in France. He has said again today that basically he would stand and fight in any future leadership contest. I won't try and catch you out because you're an experienced politician, but if the Prime Minister is fighting a leadership contest because one has been launched and it's bad for him, it's bad for the country, it's bad for your party, would you think it would be a good idea that he did stand and fight?
So there's a lot of hypotheticals that we'll have to overcome before we get to that point. And I know that's what you were getting at with the first part of your question. Look, Keir Starmer secured a huge win for us as Prime Minister, as Labour leader and then Prime Minister in July 2024. He secured that mandate and the trust of the British people to deliver all of the things that we said we would do during that election campaign. And he has my support to keep doing that. There isn't a contest. I don't want there to be a contest. And I hope that we can get on with focusing on delivering what people voted for. But in the event there is a contest, I think it's a perfectly reasonable proposition that Keir Starmer would seek to fight that. I mean, why wouldn't he? He was the Labour leader who took us to a big election victory, and he will feel, I imagine, that he has a mandate to continue to drive things forward.
And would you support him in that contest?
The Prime Minister, Keir, continues to have my support. It's a tough old job being Prime Minister. As you say, he's off at the G7 at the moment, making sure that whether it's on Ukraine, defence investment, that we're doing what is right by the country. And I have never had cause to question his motivation, the intention behind what he's seeking to do. Have we got things wrong as a government? Yes, we all have. And of course, that is about the Prime Minister. He's the leader of our party and the country. He holds responsibility for that, and he takes that incredibly seriously. But we all do.
Okay.
Like, we've all got, a responsibility in actually making this government work more effectively and doing things better as a Labour government.
Right, we've run out of time, but just to end where we began, I was at the cinema the other day there, and the trailer for Toy Story 5 came on. Do you know who the baddie is in the new Toy Story?
Big tech?
It's a tablet.
Okay.
So basically, Pixar are making your case for you.
There we are. I mean, I think this probably reflects a bit of a
societal shift.
A bit of a shift.
Yeah.
I think it probably does.
Because actually 3 years ago, the tablet wouldn't have been the baddie, would they? They'd be on the goodies side, just as another toy.
No, but just to be slightly boring about this.
Have you seen it?
I haven't.
I thought you were going to correct my Toy Story.
I haven't seen it. Mercifully, my kids are a bit too big for me to have to go and watch this now. But look, it's not the tablet, it's the use of the tablet.
Yes.
So if you are, using it for good educational purposes, overseen by a teacher, that's not the same thing as being sat doom scrolling. So
yes.
I think we do need to just be slightly careful that as we take action on the things that we worry about, we don't lose sight of the benefits that can come of technology where done properly.
Well, thanks for coming into the Newscast studio.
Thank you.